The evenings in Walnut Creek are getting colder by mid-autumn. I sit on the front porch of my house, the one I built with my own hands 37 years ago, and look out at the falling leaves of the maples. My house isn't a palace, but it has 3 bedrooms, a spacious living room with a fireplace and a backyard overlooking the hills. Dorothy and I once dreamed of having a whole bunch of grandchildren running around here. My name is Walter Ferris. I'm 67, and I've been a plumbing technician all my life. Not the most prestigious job, but it allowed me to buy a lot in a nice neighborhood and build this house. Now Dorothy has been gone for 5 years, and my only son Christopher barely shows up. I bring the mug of coffee to my lips. It's cold as hell. Inside the house, the old wall clock I restored myself ticks. Dorothy has always loved the sound of it. "It's the heart of our house, Walt," she used to say. Dorothy died of cancer at 62. Quickly, in just 6 months, she burned out. Christopher was 32 at the time, just getting a promotion at his insurance company. He came to the funeral, stayed 3 days, and drove back to San Francisco, saying that work wasn't waiting. My relationship with my son was never easy. Maybe I was too strict. Maybe I worked too hard when he was little. Or maybe I just didn't know how to show him that I loved him as much as I loved Dorothy. After she died, it was like a wall had grown between us. The phone rang in the house, interrupting my thoughts. I rose reluctantly from my chair, leaving my mug on the porch railing. "Yeah," I answered as I reached the phone in the hallway. "Dad, hi, it's Christopher." His voice sounded unusually animated. We called once a month, sometimes less, and usually the conversations were strained with long pauses. "Hello, son. Something wrong?" Why does it have to be something? There was a familiar note of irritation in his voice. "I wanted to tell you I'm coming up this weekend, and not alone." I raised my eyebrows in surprise, even though he couldn't see it. "The girl?" "Yeah, her name's Raven. Raven Bromley. We've been dating for 6 months. She's, special, Dad. I think it's serious." I didn't know what to say. Christopher never shared the details of his love life with me. The last girlfriend I knew of was while Dorothy was still alive. "It would be nice to meet you," I finally said. I'd seen Raven for the first time that weekend. A slender woman in her 30s with dark hair and a high ponytail and a bright smile. She was attractive, but there was something in her eyes that made me wary. Some kind of appraising glint. "Mr. Ferris!" she exclaimed, shaking my hand firmly. "Christopher has told me so much about you." I knew it was a lie. Christopher hardly ever mentioned me in conversation. "Walter's fine," I said. "Come in. It's not a new house, but it's your own." "Oh, don't be modest." Raven looked around with obvious interest. "Such a lovely neighborhood, such nice neighbors. We saw the man across the street greeting you." "That's Richard Higgins. We've been friends for 30 years, I replied, noting to myself that she'd talked about the neighborhood before she'd talked about the house. Christopher looked happy, but a little nervous. He kept glancing at Raven, as if checking her reaction. Over dinner, Raven peppered me with questions. How long had I lived in the house? How had real estate prices changed in the neighborhood? Had I ever thought about moving to a smaller place? Why would I want to move? "Everything I need is here," I replied, pouring tea. I noticed them exchanging quick glances. "It's just that at your age, a lot of people prefer something more compact." "No stairs, less hassle," Raven explained, touching Christopher's arm. "At my age?" I grinned. "I'm still quite capable of climbing stairs." "Of course, Dad," Christopher quickly interjected. "Raven's just worried. She works in real estate, and she has her own way of looking at things." "Oh, that's it. A realtor." That explained a lot. After dinner, when Christopher went to shower, Raven lingered with me in the kitchen. She was looking at the pictures on the wall. "Is that your wife?" she asked, pointing to a picture of Dorothy and me standing in front of the newly built house. "Yes, Dorothy. She died 5 years ago." "I'm sorry," Raven said, though there was no genuine sympathy in her voice. "Christopher said you built this house yourself." "Most of it, yes. The foundation was laid by professionals, and the rest was done by me and my friends." "Impressive." She ran her hand over the oak countertops I'd sanded myself. "Must be a lot of memories in here." "A lifetime," I nodded. "But sometimes you have to move on, right?" Her gaze sharpened. "New beginnings and all that." I didn't like this conversation. I finished my tea and stood up. "I'm sorry, it's been a long day. I prepared a guest room for the two of you. That night I couldn't sleep for a long time. There were muffled voices coming from the guest room. Christopher and Raven were arguing about something. I remembered how happy Dorothy and I had been in this house, celebrating Christopher's birthdays, decorating the tree at Christmas, sitting in the backyard on warm summer evenings. "What do you think of her?" Dorothy would ask if she were here. "I don't like that woman," I answered into the darkness. "Something about her is wrong." The next morning I woke up before anyone else and went down to make breakfast. To my surprise, Raven was already in the kitchen, looking through the contents of the drawers. "Good morning," and I said, and she flinched. "Looking for something in particular?" "Oh, Walter, just wanted to make some coffee." She smiled, but the smile didn't touch her eyes. "I hope you don't mind. There's coffee in a jar next to the refrigerator." I pointed to a tin can with a coffee bean drawn on it. Later, when Christopher joined us, Raven said, "Honey, I showed Walter the pictures of that beautiful condo I told you about. It's for senior citizens, with 24-hour medical care." "What?" I looked at her in surprise. "We didn't discuss any condos, did we?" She looked innocently surprised. "I thought we talked about it last night, about how convenient it would be to live in a place where you'd be taken care of." Christopher looked embarrassed. "Raven is just offering options, Dad. No one's saying you have to move." "And thank goodness, because I'm not going anywhere." I cut him off, feeling the anger boiling up inside. The rest of the weekend passed in a tense atmosphere. Raven kept casually mentioning different senior housing options, as well as inquiring about my savings, retirement, and future plans. Every time I abruptly cut off such conversations, Christopher would cast a reproachful glance at me. Sunday night as they were leaving, Raven gave me a big hug. "It was so nice to meet you, Walter. I hope you'll come visit us in San Francisco soon." "Maybe," I replied, not believing it for a second. As their car turned the corner, I went back into the house and sat down in my chair. I had an uneasy feeling. This woman was up to something. And worst of all, Christopher seemed to be completely under her influence. 2 weeks later, Christopher called again. "Dad, we have news. Raven and I are engaged." I almost dropped the phone. "That fast? You've only known her for 6 months. When you know it's the one, time doesn't matter." He sounded challenged. "Of course, son. Congratulations," I said, though I felt a twinge of foreboding inside. "The wedding is in 3 months. A small ceremony. And, we're thinking of moving after the wedding." "Moving? To where?" "Maybe Walnut Creek." He sounded unsure. "Raven says it's a great real estate market." It all made sense now. Raven had her eye not only on my son, but on my house. For the next few months, I watched her plan unfold. They came back twice more. Each time, Raven became more insistent in talking about my future. She brought brochures of nursing homes and told stories of seniors who had found a new life after moving out of their big houses. On one visit, I caught her in my office where all the paperwork for the home was kept. "What are you doing here?" I asked sharply. "Oh, just looking for the bathroom," she replied with a fake smile. I think I got lost. The bathroom was on the opposite side of the hallway, and she knew it well. Christopher had changed since the engagement. He started speaking in Raven's phrases, repeating her arguments about how I'd be better off in a specialized facility for the elderly. "You do realize she's after my house, right?" I asked him directly during their last visit before the wedding. Christopher erupted with anger. "How can you say that? Raven cares about you. She wants the best for you." "She wants my house, Chris, and she's using you to get it." "You're always like this," he shouted, "always thinking the worst of people. Maybe that's why you've never had any friends except old Richard across the street." It was unfair and untrue, but I realized it was useless to argue. Christopher was blinded by love, or what he mistook for love. The night before they left, I overheard a conversation on the back veranda. They didn't know I had gone out for a smoke and was standing around the corner of the house. "He's a stubborn old man," Raven said. "But we have a plan B, remember?" "I don't know, Rave." Christopher's voice sounded unsure. "This is his house after all. He built it with his own hands. So, he's alone in a 4-bedroom house. It's a waste of space and money. You're his only heir. Sooner or later, the house will be yours anyway. We'll just, expedite the process. But legally. Trust me, honey, I have connections. It'll be legal." In a way, I quietly retreated and went back into the house the other way. Now I was sure they were plotting something against me, and I had to prepare myself. The next day, after seeing them off, I sat down at the kitchen table and started writing a list. I didn't know exactly what they were planning, but I was sure of one thing. It involved my house, and if Raven thought the old plumber was going to let himself be escorted out, she was in for a big surprise. The wedding took place in a small chapel in a suburb of San Francisco in April. The day was sunny but cool. I sat in the second row, not next to the groom, as a father is supposed to do, but among the other guests. Christopher didn't ask me to be his best man or give a speech. Instead, some colleague from the insurance company, whose name I didn't even remember, stood next to him. Raven was radiant in a dress that must have cost a fortune, open-backed and embroidered with tiny pearls. She looked flawless, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. I watched her whisper something in my son's ear, and he nodded obediently, like a puppet on strings. At the banquet, I found myself at a table with Raven's distant relatives, a couple of elderly aunts and some cousin who kept checking his phone. None of them knew I was the groom's father until I introduced myself. "Oh, you're Christopher's father." One of the aunts, Ethel, exclaimed in surprise. "And we were wondering who you were. It's strange that they put you with us and not at the main table." I shrugged and took a sip of champagne. I didn't want to explain to outsiders that my own son was keeping me at a distance. After the best man's toast, I decided to come up for air. The small patio of the banquet hall was quiet and empty. All the guests were having fun inside. I sat down on a stone bench and smoked, even though I had promised Dorothy I would quit 10 years ago. "I didn't know you smoked, Walter." Raven's voice came from behind me. I turned around. She was leaning against the doorway, still in her wedding dress, but without her veil. "Special occasions," I replied, putting out my cigarette. "Congratulations. It was a beautiful ceremony." "Thank you." She came over and sat next to me, straightening her dress. "You know, Christopher was really worried that you might not show up." "He was?" I couldn't hide my surprise. "Strange. He hadn't even asked me to be best man." "He wanted to," Raven said quickly. "But we thought you'd be more comfortable just enjoying the ceremony without the responsibilities." Lie. I saw it as clearly as I saw the artificial eyelashes on her eyes. "Sinar, how nice of you to concern yourself with my comfort," I said with an irony she didn't seem to notice. "Christopher and I want you to know that we're a family now." She put her hand on my shoulder. "And family takes care of each other, right?" Her hand was cold even through the fabric of my jacket. "True," I nodded. "And family doesn't lie to each other or plot behind each other's backs either." Raven stiffened for a moment, but quickly regained her composure. "Of course not. What are you talking about, Walter?" She laughed a little too loudly. "Let's go inside. They'll be cutting the cake soon." I went back into the hall, but I couldn't shake the unpleasant feeling. This woman was now officially part of my family, and I felt like the trouble was just beginning. 2 weeks after the wedding, Christopher called with the news. He and Raven were indeed moving to Walnut Creek. They bought a house just 20 minutes away from me. "Raven found a great offer," he explained, "and she's been offered a job at a local real estate agency. Isn't that great? We'll be seeing a lot more of each other." I doubted that frequent visits were the real purpose of their move, but I decided to keep those thoughts to myself. "Yes, it sounds good," I replied. "When are you moving?" "Next month. The house needs some repairs. By the way, I was thinking, maybe you could help. You know all that plumbing stuff. That's what I'm talking about." They wanted my hands, not my company. "Sure, son, I'd be happy to help." Their new house was a modest 3-bedroom, 1-story structure in a not-so-pretty Walnut Creek neighborhood. I was surprised. With Raven's ambition and her work in real estate, I'd expected something more impressive. For the first few weeks after they moved in, I came regularly to help, fixing leaky pipes, installing new plumbing, changing wiring. Raven always greeted me with a strained smile and disappeared immediately, leaving Christopher and me alone. One day, as I was finishing the bathroom remodel, I overheard them talking in the next room. They didn't know I hadn't left yet. "I don't understand why we bought this house," Christopher said irritably. "It needs endless repairs. And the neighborhood isn't that nice." "Honorness, it's just temporary, honey," Raven replied in the tone one uses with a cranky child. "The plan is still on, But we need to be close to your father, win his trust. And if he doesn't agree, he will, or we'll find a way around it without his consent. I froze, holding the wrench. What were they talking about? What was the plan? But it's illegal, Christopher's voice sounded uncertain. Only if we get caught, Raven laughed. Relax. This place isn't going to last forever. Soon we'll be living in your father's house or selling it and buying something better. And then maybe France. You've always wanted to see Paris, haven't you? I carefully put down my tools and tiptoed out the back door. My heart was pounding like crazy. Now I knew for sure they were plotting something against me and my home. But what was it? And how were they going to accomplish it? Over the next few months, I tried to keep my guard up. Every time they invited me over for dinner or offered to help around the house, I looked for ulterior motives. Raven became especially attentive, calling to see how I was doing, offering to go grocery shopping when I twisted my ankle, even baking me a birthday cake. Christopher seemed pleased with this sudden rapprochement. See, Dad, Raven isn't as bad as you thought. I just nodded and smiled, not giving away my suspicions. One night when they came over to my house for dinner, Raven asked me in passing, "By the way, Walter, do you have a will?" I almost choked on my wine. "I beg your pardon?" "Well, a will," she waved her fork nonchalantly. "At your age, that's something to think about. You don't want Christopher to have to deal with all this in case of, you know, in the event of my death." I looked her straight in the eye. "You can speak plainly, Raven. I'm not afraid of dying." "Dad, Raven just cares about the legal side of things," Christopher interjected. "It's her job to think about these things." "I have a will," I said. "I made it when Dorothy was sick. And yes, Christopher is my only heir." Raven's eyes flashed for a moment, and I saw in them what scared me most. Greed. "Great," she clapped her hands together. "But maybe we should update it. Laws change, you know. I have a great lawyer I know who specializes in probate law." "Thank you, but my lawyer is quite competent," I replied dryly. After that conversation, their visits became more frequent. Raven often came alone, ostensibly to bring home baked goods or just to chat. But I noticed her gaze wandering through the rooms, assessing the furniture, noting the arrangement of things. One day I returned from the store earlier than I'd planned and found her in my office. She was rummaging through the desk drawer where I kept the deeds to the house. "What are you doing?" I asked, standing in the doorway. She flinched and straightened up, clutching some kind of folder to her chest. "Walter, you scared me. I was looking for a pen to leave you a note. I was getting ready to leave." "In the top drawer of your desk, where I keep the deed to the house?" She blushed, but quickly pulled herself together. "I didn't know. I just opened the first drawer I could find." "What's in your hand, Raven?" "Nothing." She tried to step around me, but I blocked the doorway. "Show me." With apparent reluctance, she handed me a folder. It was a copy of the title deed to the house. "Why do you want it?" "Just curious," she shrugged. "Professional interest. I work in real estate." "Next time, ask before you go through my stuff." I put the folder back in the drawer and locked it. I couldn't sleep that night. It was becoming all too obvious. Raven was interested in my deed to the house. But why? What could she do with them? The next day, I called my old friend Neil Barrow, who worked at a law firm specializing in real estate. "Neil, I need a consultation," I said after greetings. "Hypothetically, what could happen if someone got hold of copies of the deeds to my house?" "Hypothetically?" Neil hummed. "Walt, are you in trouble?" "Maybe. Just answer the question." Neil sighed. "The copies themselves aren't dangerous, but if someone has access to the originals and enough information about you, it's theoretically possible to commit fraud. Forge a signature, for example, especially if that someone is a close relative whom the bank or the registration office can trust." I broke out in a cold sweat. "Like a son?" "For example, Walt, what's going on?" I briefly described the situation with Raven and Christopher, their strange behavior and apparent interest in my house. "God damn it," Neil scolded. "That sounds lousy. Are you sure they're up to something illegal?" "No, but I don't want to take any chances." "Then I have some advice for you," Neil said seriously. "Get the original documents out of the house, put them in a safe deposit box, or keep them with a trusted friend. And just in case, Make a new will with clear inheritance terms. Thanks, buddy. That's exactly what I'll do. The next day, I went to the bank and rented a safe deposit box where I put all the original documents for the house, as well as other important papers. Then I met with a notary and made a new will with specific conditions. Christopher could inherit the house only if he lived in it himself for at least 10 years, least 5 years after my death. If the house was sold before that time, the proceeds were to go to the veterans charity where Dorothy had once volunteered. But I realized that even these measures might not be enough. If Raven and Christopher were really up to fraud, they could find a way around my will. I needed a backup plan, something that would protect me if they tried to act while I was alive. I started by installing new locks and a CCTV camera over the front door. Then I opened a new bank account at a different bank that Christopher didn't know about and transferred a large portion of my savings there, leaving only the bare minimum in the old account. But the most important step was to create a false trail. On Neil's advice, I prepared a set of forged documents for the house, almost identical to the original, but with imperceptible mistakes. These documents I accidentally left in the study, in the same drawer where Raven had already rummaged through. If they try to use those papers for fraud, they'll be caught quickly, Neil explained. The mistakes would show up on the first serious audit. One last thing, I've installed a hidden camera in my office, aimed at the desk with the documents. If Raven comes snooping around again, I'll have proof. All this time, I continued to act like nothing had happened, accepted their dinner invitations, smiled at Raven's fake smiles, listened to Christopher talk about his success at his new job at the local insurance company. "You're looking good, Dad," Christopher said one evening when it was just the two of us in the kitchen. "I think you've started taking Raven." I looked at my son, the only child Dorothy and I loved so much. What had become of him? When did he turn into this weak, controlling man? "She cares for you," I answered cautiously. "And if she cares for you, then I can accept her." Christopher smiled with relief. "I'm glad. It means a lot to me." When they left, I checked the camera footage in the study. Raven had indeed gone in there while I was talking to Christopher in the kitchen. She quickly checked the file drawer, but not finding the originals there, she left the room with a disappointed look on her face. So the hunt was on. I didn't know how far they were willing to go, but I was sure they would make their move sooner or later. And when they did, I would be ready. It was early Tuesday morning when my phone rang with a message. I had just finished breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast as I had done every morning for the past 20 years, and was about to go out to the garden to check on the tomatoes. It had rained hard the day before, and I was worried if it had damaged the young plants. The message came from Raven's number. I rarely received messages from her. She preferred to call or speak in person, usually with a luscious smile and hidden agenda. I unlocked my phone and read, "Your house is sold and I've flown to France with your son. Bye." I stared at those words and felt a strange calmness spill inside me. No shock, no despair, just a feeling that the last piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. 3 months. That's how long it took Raven to go from hints and careful manipulation to direct action. Faster than I'd anticipated, but still within expectations. I took a sip of my cooled coffee and reread the message again. Its tone spoke volumes. Raven was confident of her victory. She thought she'd struck the fatal blow, and now she could afford to gloat. Well, arrogance had always been her weakness. I didn't bother answering. Instead, I opened the drawer of the living room table and pulled out the folder of documents I'd prepared in advance. Everything was in place. The contract with Neil's law firm, notarized copies of the actual deeds to the house, photos and surveillance footage of the house, and most importantly, the deed to the property, dated 2 months earlier. I no longer owned the house. It was officially owned by the Walter Ferris Veterans Charitable Foundation, which I had secretly set up with Neil's help. I remained in the house for life with full protection from any attempted foreclosure. The phone rang again. This time the message was from Christopher. "Dad, I'm sorry you're finding out this way. We had to act quickly. At your age, this house is too burdensome. We've organized everything. A great boarding house for the elderly. All your stuff will be moved. It's better for everyone. Even now, in the moment of betrayal, my son tried to cover his lowliness with concern, as if selling my house without my knowledge was an act of mercy, not theft." I felt anger rising inside, but forced myself to breathe steady. Now was not the time for emotion. It was time for action. I dialed Neil's number. He answered after the second ring. Walt? What happened? They did it, I said calmly. Sold the house and fled to France. God damn it, Neil swore. Are you sure? I got a message from my sister-in-law. Straight text. The house is sold. They're in France. The nerve! Neil sounded genuinely indignant. Well, here's the plan. I'll contact the registry office and notify the police. And you get ready for a real storm. I'm ready, I replied. I'm waiting for your call. I hung up the phone and walked out onto the back porch. It was a clear, sunny day. My tomatoes had fortunately survived yesterday's downpour unscathed. I looked at the garden I'd cultivated for 30 years. The apple trees planted when Christopher was a child. The arbor Dorothy and I had built on our 25th anniversary. All of it they were trying to take away from me. I remembered how 8 weeks ago, after much deliberation, I'd made the decision to remortgage the house. It was a risky move. Setting up a charitable foundation took time and money. But it was the only sure defense. Neil had warned me that if Raven and Christopher really did falsify the documents and sell the house, it would be long and difficult to prove fraud in court. And the transfer of ownership to the foundation automatically invalidated any such transaction. It's the only way to protect your interests for sure, Neil said. Even if by some miracle they could forge your signature and convince someone that you sold the house voluntarily, it wouldn't matter, because you're no longer the owner. I agreed, and we got to work. We created a foundation, naming it after Dorothy. She had always taken care of veterans, volunteering for many years. Then quietly, without too much publicity, we retitled the property. Legally, I no longer owned the house, but I had the right to live in it for life. And after my death, the house was to be either used for the needs of veterans or sold, and the money was to be used to help them. At the same time, I'd left forged documents in the house. The same ones with deliberate mistakes, which, as I expected, Raven eventually found and used for her scam. My musings were interrupted by the phone ringing. It was Neil again. Walt, they sold the house to a couple from Sacramento, the Andersons. They paid almost $1,200,000. The deal was finalized 3 days ago through Premier Homes. Guess where your sister-in-law works? She used her own agency to make the sale? I couldn't believe the audacity of it. How did they even pull this off without my presence? Forged documents, Walt. Very good forgeries, I must admit. A power of attorney with your alleged signature, notarized by a San Francisco notary. I'll check out that notary, by the way. And a whole bunch of paperwork proving that you agreed to sell the house because of your health problems and move into a specialized facility. And the Andersons believed it. Why wouldn't they? The paperwork looked authentic. Plus, the deal was handled by an official real estate firm, and the buyers were told you were in the hospital and couldn't be present. Christopher even showed some kind of medical report. Also fake, of course. I shook my head, marveling at the ingenuity and shamelessness of this couple. What now? I'm calling the police now, Neil said firmly. It's a felony. Grand fraud, forgery, identity theft. And then I contact the Andersons. Poor guys, they're going to lose money and be without a home. It's not their fault, I sighed. Is there anything I can do to help them? Maybe their insurance will cover the loss, but if not, they have every reason to sue the Raven Agency. But that's not our concern, Walt. It's about protecting you. After talking to Neil, I decided to walk to the store around the corner. I needed to get some air, clear my head before the inevitable storm. The day promised to be hot, so I put on my old straw hat, a gift from Dorothy for our last vacation together in Florida. It was business as usual at the store. The owner, Sam Perkins, waved to me from behind the register. Good morning, Walt. The usual bread, milk, and the New York Times. And a pack of gum, I added. Today's a special day. Yeah? What are we celebrating? Sam smiled, pulling out a newspaper. Liberation, I answered cryptically. As I drove home, I noticed an unfamiliar car in front of my house, a silver sedan with Sacramento license plates. The Andersons, I thought, must be here to inspect their new purchase. A man and a woman in their 40s stood on my porch, looking around incomprehensibly. The woman was holding a folder of papers. Mr. Ferris? The man asked uncertainly as I approached. Yes, that's me. I tried to speak calmly, though I was seething with anger. Not at these people, of course. but at those who deceived them. I'm Brian Anderson, and this is my wife, Linda. He held out his hand. We, uh, we bought your house 3 days ago. The deal was done through the Premier Homes Agency. I shook his hand and nodded. I'm afraid you've been deceived, Mr. Anderson. I didn't sell my house. In fact, I haven't even legally owned it for 2 months. The couple's faces stretched in shock. But, we paid, Linda said, confused. $1,180,000. All the papers are in order. I'm sure they are, I replied, but the documents you received are forged. My son and his wife ran a scam, and now they've fled to France with your money. There must be some mistake. Brian shook his head, clearly not believing me. We have all the legal documents signed by you and notarized. Come on in the house. I opened the door. I'll explain everything and show you the real documents. Over the next hour in my living room, I told the Andersons the whole story. How I'd suspected something was wrong, how I'd set the trap, how I'd changed the house to a charitable foundation. Showed them the real deeds and a copy of the registry proving the house belonged to the Walter Ferris Foundation. But why? Linda asked with tears in her eyes. Why would your own son do this to you? Money, I answered simply. A house in this neighborhood is expensive. They wanted to get rich quick at my expense. What are we going to do now? Brian looked devastated. It's all of our savings. We sold our old house to buy this one. My lawyer is going to the police now. I put my hand on Brian's shoulder. Report the fraud as soon as possible. Maybe your insurance will cover the loss. Before we could finish talking, the doorbell rang. 2 policemen stood on the doorstep. Mr. Walter Ferris? One of them asked, showing his badge. I'm Officer Jenkins, and this is my partner, Officer Ramirez. We received a report of possible real estate fraud at this address. Come on in, officers. I stepped back, letting them pass. You're just in time. The victims of the fraud are here too. The next 2 hours turned into chaos. Cops were taking statements, examining documents, calling the station for more instructions. The Andersons were trying to contact their bank to try to stop the transfer of funds. Though it was too late, the money must have been cashed in and out of the country long ago. My phone never stopped ringing. First, Neil called with an update from the lawyers. Then Richard Higgins, my neighbor across the street, who had seen the police car outside my house and was worried if everything was okay. Then a representative from the registry office who wanted to confirm information about a fraudulent transaction. By noon, my living room had become a sort of operational headquarters. Another policeman arrived, a detective from the fraud squad. He had a long talk with me and the Andersons, taking notes on every detail. You did the right thing, Mr. Ferris, the detective said, looking over my paperwork. The transfer of ownership to the foundation was a smart move. But I'm curious, how did you know what they were up to? Too many signs, I replied. The excessive interest in my house, the constant talk of boarding houses for the elderly, the strange behavior. And then I overheard them talking about moving to France. Put 2 and 2 together. You're lucky to have a good lawyer friend, the detective remarked. Most older people in this situation would be left with nothing. Lucky, I agreed, though I knew it wasn't luck. I'd always been a careful man, used to working with my hands and my head. I'd learned to recognize weaknesses in pipelines, and in people too. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, everyone finally dispersed. The Andersons went to the bank and the insurance company, the police to do the paperwork for the international manhunt for Christopher and Raven. I was alone in the house I'd almost lost. I sat down in an old chair in the living room, and for the first time all day allowed myself to fully comprehend what had happened. My only son, my flesh and blood, had tried to steal my home. The house I had built with my own hands for him and his mother, the place where family memories and traditions were supposed to be kept. The pain of this betrayal was sharp, but I didn't let it take over. Instead, I felt a strange relief. No longer did I have to pretend everything was okay. No more wondering what they were up to. Cards revealed, game over. The phone rang again. Christopher's number popped up on the screen. I hesitated for a moment before answering it. Yes? Dad, my son sounded panicked. What's going on? I just got a call from the Walnut Creek police. They said there's a fraud case against me and Raven. Did you expect anything else? I asked calmly. After you sold my house without my knowledge? But you didn't mind. He sounded genuinely surprised. Raven said that you'd discussed everything, that you'd agreed to move to the boarding house, that we had to act quickly before the deal fell through. I grinned bitterly. And you believed it? Without even calling me to confirm? I thought, she said, Christopher stammered, his voice shaking. Dad, we're not in France. We're in San Francisco, looking at houses. Raven said she sent you a message with information about the boarding house. So the message about France was just gloating, or an attempt to cover your tracks. You sold a house that didn't belong to you, Chris, and you forged my signature on the deeds. That's a felony. I didn't forge it, he yelled into the phone. Raven said she had power of attorney from you, that it was legitimate. And you believed it again? I sighed. It was always easier to believe a lie than to ask directly, wasn't it? There was a heavy silence in the phone. What do I do, Dad? Christopher finally asked in a low voice. Turn yourself in to the police and tell the truth, I answered. Maybe if you cooperate, the sentence will be lighter. And try to give the money back to the Andersons. They don't deserve to be cheated like this. The Andersons? Who's the Andersons? The family you stole $1,080,000 from. What? What million? The shock in Christopher's voice seemed genuine. Raven said the house sold for $800,000, and most of it was going to pay for your board and care. I realized that Raven had deceived not only the Andersons and me, but also her own husband. Talk to your wife, Chris, and a good lawyer. You're in big trouble. I hung up the phone, feeling a mixture of anger, frustration, and oddly enough, relief. My phone continued to ring all evening. Police, reporters, neighbors, lawyers. My house was suddenly at the center of a scandal, and everyone wanted to know the details. But I didn't take any more calls. Instead, I went out on the back porch, sat in an old rocking chair, and watched the sun set over the hills. My plan had worked. I kept the house. But the price was the loss of my son, although, truth be told, I'd lost him long before that day. The morning after the scandal was surprisingly quiet. I woke up at first light, an old habit developed over decades of early rising for work. Birds chirped outside the window as if nothing had happened, as if my son and his wife hadn't tried to steal my house, as if there wasn't a criminal prosecution waiting for them. I went down to the kitchen and started making coffee. Strong, with a little sugar, just the way Dorothy liked it. Strangely, I felt calmer than I had in months. Uncertainty is always harder than knowing the truth, however bitter it may be. The phone on the kitchen table vibrated. Neil. Good morning, Walt. My friend's voice sounded cheerful, despite the early hour. How did you sleep after last night? Surprisingly well, I admitted. What's new? There's a lot of news, Neil chuckled. First, the police had issued arrest warrants for Christopher and Raven. Secondly, Raven's agency has been frozen, and they're starting a full audit of all transactions over the last year. It looked like your case might not have been the only one. I shook my head, though Neil couldn't see it. Not the only one? How many other elderly people could have fallen victim to her machinations? What about the Andersons? Hearing their insurance covers fraudulent transactions, but the reimbursement process will take time. In the meantime, they're without a home and most of their savings. Neil sighed. Too bad for them. Good people, just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I feel sorry for them too, I agreed. What about Christopher and Raven? Any news on them? Here's where it gets interesting, Neil said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. Detective Morrison called me an hour ago. They're really in France. They took a flight yesterday morning, but Raven lied to Christopher about the amount of the sale. She told him that the house had sold for $800,000, not $1,200,000 as it had. That's what I thought, I nodded, remembering the conversation I'd had with my son yesterday. She had deceived even him. What's more, she seemed to have transferred most of the money into a separate account in her own name. Christopher only discovered this last night when you spoke to him. He called the police and testified against Raven. I sat back in my chair, stunned by this news. Christopher ratted her out? Trying to save his own skin, Neil snorted. Claims he was in the dark, that Raven planned the whole thing and tricked him as much as she did you. I felt a strange mix of emotions. Bitter at my son's betrayal, relieved that he wasn't the main villain in the story, and tired of the whole situation. Do you believe him? Neil asked after a pause. I don't know. I answered honestly. Maybe he really didn't know about the forged documents, but he knew for sure that I hadn't agreed to sell the house, and he went ahead with it anyway. Sonner. Well, either way, the French police are already looking for them. Cooperation with our law enforcement is good in these cases. After talking to Neil, I drank my coffee and decided to do my usual morning chores. I went out to the garden, checked the tomatoes, watered the roses. Simple physical work always helped me get my thoughts in order. Around 10 o'clock in the morning, the doorbell rang. Detective Morrison stood on the doorstep, the same detective who had taken the fraud report yesterday. Next to him was a woman in a sharp suit I didn't know. "Good morning, Mr. Ferris," Morrison said. "I hope we're not too early. This is attorney Elizabeth Chen. She's handling your case. I invited them into the house." We settled into the living room and Detective Morrison began the conversation. "We have an update on your case, Mr. Ferris. As you may already know, your son and his wife flew to Paris yesterday morning. But thanks to swift action and international cooperation, the French police have already located them." "So quickly?" I was surprised. "They used credit cards to pay for the hotel," Prosecutor Chen explained. "Not a smart move for people trying to escape justice. Besides, your son contacted us himself and provided the information. He claims he was cheated by his wife," Morrison continued. "He says he didn't know the documents were forged and thought you had actually agreed to sell the house." "Do you believe him?" I asked, repeating the question I'd recently asked Neil. The detective and the prosecutor exchanged glances. "It's a complicated question, Mr. Ferris," Chen began cautiously. "On the one hand, there is evidence that Mrs. Ferris did most of the work of forging the documents and carrying out the transaction. On the other hand, it's hard to believe that your son didn't suspect anything. In any case," Morrison intervened, "we'd like you to tell us more about your plan, how you prepared for their fraud. It might help in court." I nodded and began to tell about the first suspicions that arose when Raven took an unusual interest in my house before we were married, the overheard conversation about France, the time I noticed her rummaging through my files. After that, I went to Neil Barrow, my friend and lawyer. He advised me to take preventative measures. We decided that the safest way was to remortgage the house. "That's very thoughtful," said Prosecutor Chen, taking notes. "Tell me more about the foundation you set up." "It's a charitable foundation in the name of my late wife, Dorothy. She volunteered for many years with a veterans aid organization. After she died of cancer, I thought about memorializing her in some way, but I kept putting it off. And now there was a concrete reason," I smiled sadly. "The foundation is officially registered and has all the necessary documents. I gave him the house with the condition of my lifetime residence in it." "And the forged documents?" Morrison asked. "The ones your sister-in-law found?" "It was Neil's idea. We created a set of documents almost identical to the real ones, but with a few imperceptible mistakes. Date of birth, social security number, boundary description. Mistakes that would have popped up on a serious audit, but could have been missed on a cursory glance." "Did you leave these documents where she could find them?" "Yeah, in the desk drawer where the real ones used to be. I set up a hidden camera and actually recorded her going through my papers when she thought I was in the kitchen." Detective Morrison whistled. "Impressive, Mr. Ferris. You could go undercover." I smiled. "I just know how leaks work, Detective. Sometimes you have to create a small leak first to see where the weak spot is." Prosecutor Chen closed her notebook and looked at me with respect. "Your actions were perfectly legal and extremely prudent, Mr. Ferris. Many people in your position would have been victimized." "What will happen to Christopher and Raven now?" I asked. "The French authorities will detain them in the next few hours," Morrison replied. "Then the extradition process will begin. Given the nature of the crime and the amount of damage, they face serious penalties, especially Raven, against whom the evidence is strongest." When they left, I sat back in my chair and stared at the picture on the mantelpiece for a long time. Dorothy, Christopher, and I on a picnic in the park. Christopher was about 8 at the time. We were all smiling, happy and carefree. When did it all go wrong? The phone rang again. Christopher's number. I hesitated to answer it, but I picked it up. "Dad," his voice sounded scared. "The police are here. They've arrested Raven. They say they're going to arrest me too, as soon as they finish the paperwork." "Where are you?" I asked. "At a hotel in Paris." Dad, I swear I didn't know about the forged documents. Raven told me that you agreed that everything was legal. And the money, Chris. I tried to speak calmly. Did you really think I'd agree to sell the house so you could fly to France? Hm. She said that most of the money was going to pay for a boarding house for you, that we'd only take a portion of it as compensation for taking care of you. There was desperation in his voice. I believed her, Dad. She's my wife. I loved her. You did. I noticed the time change. I'm not so sure anymore. He grinned bitterly. When it turned out that she'd lied about the amount of the sale and transferred the money to her own account, I realized she'd been using me all along, using me to get to you and your house. I felt sorry for my son, despite his role in all of this. He was a weak man, easily manipulated, but not inherently evil. What am I going to do, Dad? He asked, and in his voice I heard that little boy who used to come running to me with broken knees. Tell the truth, Chris. The whole truth. Cooperate with the police. Maybe it'll lessen your sentence. Will you testify in my favor? Will you say that I might not have known about the forgery? I wondered. Could Christopher really not have known? Maybe, but he certainly knew that I hadn't agreed to sell the house. I'll tell the truth, son. Just the truth. After talking to Christopher, I decided to take a walk. I needed some fresh air and time to think. I headed for the small park nearby where Dorothy and I often walked in the evenings. The day was warm, but not hot. Perfect weather for a walk. Children played in the park. Young mothers chatted on benches. Elderly couples strolled slowly along the paths. Ordinary, quiet life. Such a contrast to the chaos my own had become. I sat on a bench by the pond and watched an elderly man feeding the ducks with a little girl, apparently his granddaughter. They laughed as the ducks greedily grabbed the bread, pushing each other and flapping their wings. The usual family idol that I'll never have. My phone rang again. Neil this time. Walt, just got the news. French police have Raven and Christopher in custody. They were picked up at the Hotel Le Marceau about an hour ago. I know, Christopher called me before he was arrested. Yeah? What did he say? That he didn't know about the forgery, that Raven tricked him just like she tricked me. And you believe him? It was the third time I'd been asked that question all day. I want to believe him, I answered honestly. But even if he didn't know about the fake, he knew I hadn't agreed to the sale. And he went ahead with it anyway. That's a crime too, Walt, Neil reminded me gently. Maybe less serious than what Raven did, but it's still a crime. I know, I sighed. What happens next? They'll be extradited to the U.S. within a week. Then they'll be charged with fraud, forgery, and grand larceny. Given the amount and careful planning, Raven could get up to 20 years. Christopher, if he really cooperates and didn't know about the forgery, might get less. But he couldn't avoid jail time. I was silent, trying to comprehend what I was hearing. My son is in prison, my only child. There's something else, Neil continued. The police checked out the Raven agency's other transactions. It seems your case wasn't the only one. There have been at least 3 suspicious sales in the last year where the owners were elderly and the paperwork was questionable. Jesus, I exhaled. Is she a serial fraudster? Looks like it. All this time she'd been using her position at the real estate agency to orchestrate schemes like this. Maybe Christopher really didn't know the extent of her activities. After the conversation, I went home and spent the rest of the day going through old photo albums. I looked at pictures of little Christopher, his first steps, his first day of school, his graduation. Where had I gone wrong in his upbringing? What had led to this ending? Detective Morrison called this evening with an update. Mr. Ferris, I'm officially confirming that Raven and Christopher Ferris have been detained by French authorities and are awaiting extradition. I'd also like to inform you that DHN has filed a request to freeze all of Raven Ferris accounts. It is hoped that at least some of the Andersons' money can be recovered. What about the other victims? I asked, remembering my conversation with Neil. I'd heard that there had been other cases of fraud. Morrison was silent. There are. We found evidence of at least 3 such schemes in the last year. Unfortunately, in 2 cases, the victims had already passed away. Elderly people with no close relatives. Their property was sold and the money disappeared. The 3rd case is currently under investigation. an 82-year-old woman whose house was sold allegedly with her consent, although she claims she never signed the documents. That's horrible, I shook my head. How could Raven do this to defenseless elderly people? Opera? Some people have no conscience, Mr. Ferris, Morrison sighed. Fortunately, you were smarter and more prudent. The next few days were spent in constant calls and meetings with the police, prosecutors, and journalists. The real estate fraud story became a local sensation, especially when other cases surfaced. My photo appeared in the Walnut Creek Gazette with the headline, "Retiree Outwits Scammers." A week later, the official extradition confirmation came. Raven and Christopher were brought to the U.S. under escort and placed in the county detention center. I received a call from the prosecutor's office asking if I would be willing to meet with my son before the preliminary hearing. I thought for a long time before giving my answer. What would I tell him? What do I want to hear? In the end, I agreed. The next day, I arrived at the detention center, a dull gray building on the outskirts of the city. After an ID check and search, I was led into the visiting room, a small room with a plastic table and 2 chairs. Christopher entered, accompanied by a guard. He had lost weight and gauntness during the week. He was wearing prison clothes, and it looked so out of place that I was speechless for a moment. "Hi, Dad," he said quietly, sitting down across from me. "Hello, Christopher." I tried to speak calmly, even though everything inside was clenching with pain. "How are you?" "How can I be?" He grinned bitterly. "I'm in jail. My wife is a serial cheater. My father doesn't believe a word I say." "That's fine. That's just fine." "I didn't say I didn't believe you," I countered. "Certainly right, but I didn't say you did." He looked me straight in the eye. "Look, Dad, I know I screwed up. I know I should have called you. I should have verified the information, but I really didn't know about the forgery, and I had no idea about the other frauds." I stared at him for a long time, trying to see in this grown, broken man the boy I once taught to ride a bike. "Tell me everything, Chris, from the beginning. How you met Raven, when you first talked about my house, when the plan to sell came up." And he did. How he met Raven at a company party, how she charmed him with her energy and ambition, how gradually, drop by drop, she had begun to indoctrinate him with the idea that I would be better off in a specialized facility for the elderly. She said that you could start having health problems at any moment, that it was dangerous to live alone in such a big house at your age, Christopher said, looking down at the table. She kept giving me examples of elderly people who had had accidents because there was no medical help around. "And you believe that?" "I wanted to believe that she cared about you," he shrugged, and then she started talking about selling. Said she'd found the perfect boarding house, but it was expensive and selling the house was the only way to pay for it. Claimed she talked to you, that you agreed. "And you didn't call me to check?" "She always found reasons why I shouldn't have called you. Either you were upset and didn't want to discuss it, or you weren't feeling well, or you were away at a friend's house." He shook his head. God, I was blind. As I listened to his confession, I was struggling with different feelings inside of me. Anger at Raven, disappointment in my son for allowing himself to be manipulated, and a deep, unspeakable sadness that our relationship was broken, perhaps forever. "What did your lawyer say?" I finally asked. "What are your chances?" "If I cooperate fully with the prosecution and testify against Raven, I might get 5 to 8 years instead of 15 to 20, he said in a lifeless voice, with the possibility of parole in 3 years with good behavior. 3 years, I repeated, 3 years in prison. My son. Dad, Christopher hesitantly reached across the table. I know I don't deserve to be forgiven, but I want you to know that I never meant to hurt you. I was confused. I was weak. I let her manipulate me, but I'm not a monster. I looked at his outstretched hand, then slowly reached out my own and shook his palm. I know, Chris, you're not a monster, just a man who made a very bad choice. As I walked out of the lockup, it was drizzling a light rain outside. I stood under the canopy of the building, hesitant to take a step out into the rain, even though the car was only a few meters away, as if this small discomfort could distract me for a moment from a much deeper pain. My cell phone rang. Detective Morrison's number. Mr. Ferris, we have an update on your son and daughter-in-law's case. Raven has agreed to a plea bargain, pleading guilty to all counts of fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence of 20 years instead of life. 20 years, I repeated. And the money? Any chance of getting it back to the Andersons? Partially, Morrison answered. They found about 800,000 in Raven's accounts. The rest seems to have been spent or hidden somewhere else. But that's a substantial amount. Yeah, I agreed. It is. When I got home, the first thing I did was go into the study and pull out an old frame photograph of me and Dorothy on our wedding day. She was smiling in her simple white dress, and I looked at her with adoration. What would you do, Dot? I asked the photograph. Would you be able to forgive him? There was no answer, of course, but I could almost physically feel what she would have said. Dorothy always knew how to forgive, always believed the best in people, even when I doubted, even when I saw only their flaws. That evening, Neil called with the latest news. Walt, this case is taking an unexpected turn. The FBI has joined the investigation. It seems Raven's scheme was part of a larger network of elderly real estate scams all over the West Coast. Really? I was stunned. She wasn't working alone? Not according to preliminary reports, no. There are connections to other real estate agencies in San Francisco and Los Angeles. The total amount of fraud probably runs into the tens of millions. I shook my head, trying to comprehend the scope of the crime. And Christopher? Is he involved in this broader scheme? There's no evidence of his involvement outside of your case so far, but the investigation has only just begun, Walt. Who knows what else will come up? It's been a month since Christopher and Raven were extradited to the United States. In that time, I've given numerous statements to the police, the DA's office, FBI investigators, told the same story over and over, each time reliving the betrayal anew. The investigation grew. As it turned out, Raven was indeed part of an organized group specializing in elderly real estate fraud. Her good looks and charm made her the perfect bait. She would find single men with grown children, marry their sons, and use her new family connections to gain access to the property. Christopher wasn't her first husband. Before him was one Alan Prescott of Santa Barbara, whose father had been swindled in a similar manner. Only that elderly man was not as prudent as I was, and actually lost his home and died of a heart attack shortly thereafter. My visit to the isolation center was the only one I ever made. I never visited my son again, although he continued to call, first every day, then twice a week. I saw his number on the phone screen, but I didn't answer. What could I say to him? That I forgave the betrayal? That would be a lie. That I wished him the best? After what he'd done? No. Silence was better than fake words of comfort. Christopher also wrote letters. The first came 2 weeks after his arrest, a long one, 8 pages long, apologizing, explaining, and pleading for forgiveness. I read it once and put it in my desk drawer. A second letter arrived a week later, followed by a third. All of them went unanswered. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my life. The first thing I did was to contact the management of the Dorothy Charitable Foundation. Informally, they were the ones who now owned my house. After much discussion, it was decided to sell the house on the condition that I could use the proceeds to buy a new home, with the remainder going to the foundation. Neil helped with the legal formalities, and soon the house was put up for sale, this time legally, through a reliable real estate agency. The price was set fair, but not underestimated, $1,300,000. The buyer was found surprisingly quickly, a young family from San Francisco, moving to the suburbs for the sake of children. 2 twin boys, cheerful wife, husband, a programmer in a large technology company. When they came to look at the house, I couldn't help but think of myself and Dorothy 37 years ago, just as young, full of hopes and plans. Mr. Ferris, the woman, Liz Patterson, said to me as I showed them the backyard, "You have no idea how much we love your house, especially that apple tree. The kids are going to love it." I smiled as I looked at the tree, planted when Christopher was a baby. "Yes, the apples are great, sweet. They ripen at the end of August." "We're sorry to hear you're selling such a beautiful house," her husband David added. "It must be hard to leave a place you've lived in for so many years." I shrugged. "All in good time. This house deserves a family with kids, laughter, running up and down stairs. But I had to move on. The deal was done quickly and without complications. Unlike the previous attempted sale, everything was legal, with the necessary inspections and paperwork. I received a check for $1,300,000, of which I could use $1 million to buy a new home, and $300,000 went into the fund. Then I started looking for a new house. Not just any house, but the one Dorothy and I had dreamed of in the last years of her life. A small cottage by the lake. We'd often said that when Christopher finally got back on his feet and we retired, we'd sell the big house and buy something compact, overlooking the water, where we could watch sunsets and fish. I took my time looking at various options within a 150-kilometer radius of Walnut Creek. I wanted to be far enough away from my old place to make a fresh start, but not so far that I'd lose touch with friends like Neil. Eventually, I found the perfect place, a one-story, two-bedroom house on the shores of Lake Berryessa in Napa County. The house wasn't new and needed some repairs, but it had a solid foundation and, most importantly, a stunning view of the lake right from the terrace. It was only worth $650,000, far less than I could spend, which left money for repairs and improvements. The owner happened to be an elderly widow, Mrs. Eleanor Simmons, whose husband had passed away the year before. She was moving in with her daughter in Florida and wanted to sell the house as soon as possible. "And this is a special place, Mr. Ferris," she said as she showed me the house. "Harold and I lived here for 23 happy years. I'd like the new owner to appreciate it as much as we did." "I will, Mrs. Simmons," I promised. "I too had a beloved wife whom I lost. We dreamed of a place like this." She smiled, and in her eyes I saw the understanding that only those who have experienced such a loss can have. "Then the house is yours, Mr. Ferris. Do we have a deal?" "Deal." While the paperwork for the new house was being processed, I was packing up the old one. 37 years of my life in a few dozen boxes. Clothes, books, tools, memorabilia. I was ruthless, getting rid of everything unnecessary, leaving only what really mattered. I put Christopher's photos in a separate box, but I didn't take them with me. I left them in the garage, telling the Pattersons I'd pick them up later. Maybe someday I'd be ready to look at those pictures again, but not now. Moving day turned out to be sunny and warm. I walked around the empty house one last time, saying goodbye to each room. The bedroom where Dorothy and I had slept for so many years was the one I stayed in the longest. "That's it, Dot," I said into the void. "A new chapter begins." I thought I felt a light touch on my shoulder, as if she were here, giving her blessing on this step. The handover of the keys to the Pattersons took place in a warm, almost family-like atmosphere. Liz baked a cake, the twin boys excitedly ran around the empty rooms, and David respectfully questioned me about the house and what to look out for when using it. "The boiler makes a noise when it starts up, but that's normal," I explained. "But if it starts knocking, call a master immediately, and watch your gutters in the fall, as leaves often clog them." "Thank you, Mr. Ferris," David shook my hand. "We'll take good care of your house." "It's your home now," I smiled. "May it bring you as much happiness as it once did me." When I left, I didn't look back. I didn't want my last memory of the house where most of my life had been spent to be the sight of the building shrinking in the rearview mirror. Instead, I looked ahead, at the road leading to Lake Berryessa and my new home. Moving and settling in took up all my time and thoughts. I deliberately immersed myself in physical labor, repairing the leaky roof, replacing rotten boards on the patio, painting the walls. Every night I fell asleep, barely touching my pillow, exhausted but with a sense of accomplishment. The phone kept ringing. Christopher was persistent. Occasionally I saw other numbers. His lawyer, Detective Morrison, even Raven had once tried to contact me from jail. I didn't answer any of them. I wasn't ready. 3 weeks after the move, when the major work on the house was completed, Neil came to see me. He brought a bottle of good whiskey and news about the case. "Yeah, Raven got 22 years without parole before 15 years, he said as we sat on the terrace watching the sunset over the lake. "She was the mastermind of the scheme, though not the organizer of the entire network. Turned in her associates in exchange for a reduced sentence." "And Christopher?" I asked, saying my son's name out loud for the first time in a long time. 8 years, with the possibility of parole in 3 if he behaves himself." Neil sipped his whiskey. "He cooperated fully with the investigation, proved he didn't know about the other fraud cases. Plus, he had no prior convictions, so that played a role too." I nodded, watching the sun touch the horizon line. coloring the water red. Does he keep calling you? Neil asked cautiously. Yes. And you still don't answer? No, Neil sighed. Walt, I understand your pain, but he's still your son, your only child. He stopped being my son the moment he decided to steal my house, I said firmly. Or even before that, when he chose to side with a woman he barely knew over the father who raised him. People make mistakes, Neil said softly, sometimes terrible ones. But that doesn't mean they don't deserve a second chance. I shook my head. It's not about forgiveness, Neil. It's about trust. I can't trust him anymore. And without trust, what kind of relationship is there? Neil didn't argue. We sat in silence, finishing our whiskey and watching the last rays of the sun disappear over the horizon and the first stars appear in the sky. Before we left, Neil left me a folder of documents. It's a status report on the Dorothy Fund. Donations that have come in, plans for the use of the funds. Take a look at it when you have time. You're still on the board. Your opinion is important. I nodded, grateful for the change of subject. I'll definitely take a look. Thanks, Neil, for everything. After my friend left, I was alone in the silence of my new home. For the first time in a long time, I had no urgent business or repair work to do. I could just sit and think. And I thought about Christopher, about the little boy I was teaching to ride his bike, about the teenager with whom we built a birdhouse for a school project, about the young man who left for college, full of ambition and plans. Where and when did our paths diverge enough for him to betray me? Maybe I was too hard on him as a child, or maybe I wasn't strict enough. Maybe after Dorothy's death, I had become too distant, immersed in my own grief, oblivious to his needs? Or was it something deeper? His character, a weakness I couldn't or wouldn't see in time? Was it a tendency to take the easy way out, to be influenced by stronger personalities? I found no answers, only new questions. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it didn't matter why things had gone wrong. All that mattered was that now I had to move on with my life, without my son, no family, alone. The next day, I decided to explore the neighborhood of my new home. Lake Berryessa was a popular vacation spot, especially in the summer, but now in early fall there were fewer tourists, and it was possible to enjoy relative peace. I walked along the shore, watching fishermen cast their rods from small boats. The local fishermen said that the lake held large bass and trout. I had never been much into fishing before, but now I thought it might be a good hobby, a quiet, measured activity that required patience and attention, qualities I had always lacked. In a small store on the shore, I bought a simple rod, a couple of trollers, and got some advice from a chatty salesman. The best time is early in the morning, before 8, or in the evening, after 5, he told me, showing me how to tie the line correctly. And stay close to that bay, see? It's deeper there, and the fish are bigger. I thanked him and went to the specified place. The first attempts to cast the rod were clumsy, but gradually I began to catch the rhythm. Sitting on a small folding chair, looking at the float bobbing on the water, I felt the tension of the last few months begin to release me. The fish weren't biting that day, but that didn't matter. More important was the process, the silence interrupted only by the splash of the waves and the cries of seagulls, the glare of the sun on the water, the feeling of unity with nature, something I had been missing in my life for a long time. When I got home, I found a new message from Christopher on my answering machine. "Dad, it's me again." His voice sounded tired and forlorn. "I know you don't want to talk to me. I understand that. But, I just wanted to tell you that the trial's over. I got 8 years. I'll probably be out in 3 if... It doesn't matter. I just wanted to let you know. And also, I'm really sorry. I know it won't fix anything, but I'm really sorry. I love you, Dad." I stood there listening to the dial tone after the message ended, something clenched in my chest, a mixture of anger, hurt, and to my surprise, pity. Not for myself, for him, for the man who had lost everything because of his own weakness and stupidity. I spent the next few days setting up my life in my new home. I got to know my neighbors, a couple about my age, Tom and Barbara Willis, who lived 2 houses down from me, and a young guy named Jason, who was renting the house across the street while he wrote a book. Tom was an avid fisherman and was eager to teach me the finer points of the art. We started going out on the lake together, early in the morning when the water was mirror-like and the air was fresh and cool. "Curry, see how you hold a rod?" he would say, showing the correct position of his hands. "Like this, a little more relaxed, and don't yank as soon as you feel a nibble. Let the fish swallow properly." Under his guidance, I caught my first fish, a small perch, which we, however, released back. "It's too small," Tom explained. "Let it grow up. We'll catch bigger ones next time." Barbara was a great cook and often invited me to dinner. She reminded me of Dorothy, just as caring, with the same quiet sense of humor. Sometimes sitting at their table, listening to their banter, I found myself thinking that this is what my life might have been like if Dorothy hadn't gotten sick. If Christopher had grown up to be a different person. If only. But I didn't let myself go into those thoughts. It's no use thinking about what might have been. All that mattered was what was now. And now was a quiet life by the lake. New friends, new interests. I began to repair an old boat I found in the shed behind the house. Perhaps someday I could take it out to the middle of the lake, to where the fish are bigger and the silence is fuller. The phone continued to ring, though less frequently now. Christopher seemed to be beginning to realize that I wasn't going to answer it. His messages on the answering machine were getting shorter, more formal. He was just giving updates on his life in prison, no emotional pleas for forgiveness. "I was moved to another cell. The neighbor is normal, a quiet guy," he said in one message. "Enrolled in an accounting course. I think it might come in handy when I get out." I listened to these messages but didn't call back. Part of me wanted to support him, to tell him that education was the right choice, that I was proud of his decision to make good use of his time. But the other, bigger part still wasn't ready to take that step. Fall had changed to winter, and the nature around the lake had changed. The water became darker, the trees shed their leaves, and frost appeared on the grass in the mornings. I continued to go fishing with Tom, now wearing warm jackets and hats. "It's harder to fish in winter, but it's more interesting," he said, rubbing his hands, reddened from the cold. "Less people, more fish." And silence. "Do you hear how quiet it is?" I listened. Indeed, the winter lake was surprisingly silent. No tourists with their music and laughter. No motorboats, not even birds. Only the occasional splash of fish and the rustle of the wind in the bare branches. There was something cleansing about this silence. It filled the emptiness inside me. The emptiness that had formed after my son's betrayal and all the drama that followed. In the silence, I found the peace that had been missing for so long. Christmas was approaching. The first Christmas in my new home, the first without contact with my son in his entire life. Barbara insisted I spend the holiday with them. "No one should be alone on Christmas Day, Walter," she said in a tone that brooked no objection. "I cook the turkey, Tom makes his specialty punch, and you bring yourself in good cheer. No gifts, no strings attached." I agreed, even though part of me wanted to spend the day alone with memories. Of Christmases past, when Dorothy would make her famous apple pie, and little Christopher would look forward to the presents under the tree. The day before Christmas came a letter from Christopher, a thick envelope marked correctional facility where he was serving time. I put it on the table without opening it. I didn't want his words, whatever they were, to ruin my holiday. Christmas dinner at the Willises was warm and cozy. Tom told stories about his fishing adventures, Barbara joked about his tendency to exaggerate, and I shared stories about my work as a plumber. The funniest things I'd ever heard. To new beginnings. Tom raised his glass as we sat down to a table of turkey and all the traditional fare. And to new friends. To new friends, I repeated, feeling a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with punch. When I got home late that night, I saw the envelope from Christopher still on the table. After a warm evening with new friends, after a few glasses of punch, I felt strong enough to read it. The letter was long, 10 pages written in small, neat handwriting. Christopher wrote about his life in prison, the courses he'd enrolled in, his plans for the future. But most of the letter was devoted to apologies and explanations. "I'm not apologizing, Dad," he wrote. "I know I don't deserve it. I just want you to know I realize how awful what I did was. Not just trying to sell your house, but betraying the trust that should exist between father and son. I failed you. I failed my mom's memory. I failed myself. And now I'm paying the price, paying justly. I read his words, and something inside me trembled. Not forgiveness. No, that was still a long way off. But perhaps the first step toward understanding, toward accepting what had happened and moving on. When I finished reading, I folded the letter and put it away in my desk drawer, the same place where I kept the picture with Dorothy. I wasn't ready to respond. Maybe I never would be. But for the first time in a long time, I felt the weight of anger and resentment lighten a little. I went out onto the terrace despite the cold and took a long look at the lake glistening in the moonlight. My new life was here, in this quiet place, with new friends, new interests. A life that had started out of betrayal and pain, but was slowly becoming something worthwhile, something I could call my own. 6 months flew by. Winter at Lake Berryessa was replaced by early spring and then warm summer. My cabin was transformed. I repaired the roof, rebuilt the porch to almost double its size, and planted a small vegetable garden in the backyard. The boat I found in the barn also got a new lease on life after a major overhaul and a fresh coat of paint. Now I went fishing on it regularly, sometimes alone, sometimes with Tom. Life took on a new rhythm, calm, measured, without fuss and drama. I made new friends among the neighbors, joined the local fishing club, even started helping to repair the public pier. My plumbing skills proved useful when it came to pipes and fixtures. At the end of June, I received an email from Neil. We usually communicated by phone, so the formal envelope with his law firm's logo made me a little wary. "Dear Walt," Neil wrote, "I hope you're doing well at the lake and have finally found the peace you've been looking for. I'm writing on official business. Christopher has filed a petition to have his case reconsidered due to new circumstances. It turns out that Raven was indeed deceiving him on a much larger scale than we originally thought. Not only was she hiding the true amount of the sale of your home from him, but she was keeping him in the dark about her other fraudulent schemes. Evidence has been found that she systematically forged documents and signatures without his knowledge." I reread those lines several times trying to figure out how I felt. Relief, satisfaction, doubt. It was hard to determine. Part of me wanted to believe that Christopher was just a pawn in Raven's game, an innocent victim. But the other part reminded me that, no matter how informed he was still involved in trying to take my home away from me. "In light of these circumstances," Neil continued, "the court is considering a reduced sentence for Christopher. His attorney has requested your testimony as a victim. If you testify that you believe a lenient review is possible, it will make a significant difference in the court's decision. Please let me know your decision as soon as possible. I am not pressuring you and will fully understand if you refuse to participate." At the end of the letter was a handwritten note. "I know this is difficult for you, friend, but think carefully. Sometimes mercy heals not only the one to whom it is bestowed, but also the one who shows it." I folded the letter and went out onto the veranda. The day was hot, the sun reflected in the waters of the lake, creating thousands of shimmering reflections. I stared at the glow, trying to make sense of my feelings. Christopher still sent letters once a month now, short and discreet. He talked about his life in prison, the courses he was taking, his plans for the future. He didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't beg for help. He just kept in touch, as if doing some kind of duty. I collected these letters in a separate folder, but rarely reread them. They evoked too many conflicting emotions. That evening, I called Neil. "I got your letter," I said without preamble. "What do you think?" Neil's voice sounded cautious. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to believe that he was just a fooled fool. But the other part—" "I understand," Neil interrupted. "But the facts are in his favor, Walt. From the looks of it, Raven really was a master manipulator. And not just with Christopher, with everyone. She had a whole bunch of people wrapped around her finger, including experienced lawyers and bank employees. Are you saying I should forgive him?" "I'm saying you can give him a chance to redeem himself," Neil replied softly. "You don't have to repair the relationship. Just recognize that he deserves a lighter punishment." I was silent for a long time, pondering his words. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "Give me a few days." Over the next week, I thought a lot about Christopher, about our past, about what had happened. I reread all his letters from prison, trying to find answers in them. Were his remorse and explanations sincere? Was he truly unaware of the extent of Raven's deception? On Sunday, I went fishing with Tom. We took the boat out to the middle of the lake, where it was particularly quiet and serene. While we waited for a nibble, I told him about the situation with Christopher, briefly without too much detail. It's a complicated case. Tom shook his head. Family betrayal is the most painful wound of all. What would you do if you were me? I asked. Tom stared at the float for a long time before answering. You know, Walt, when I was young, I made a terrible mistake too. Got into gambling, lost a lot of money, including the money my father put aside for my mother's treatment. He sighed heavily. My father didn't speak to me for 5 years. He wouldn't even let me go to my mother's funeral. And when he got sick, he wouldn't let me visit him. He died without ever forgiving me. I was silent, surprised by this unexpected revelation. And you know what I realized then? His unforgiveness hurt him more than it hurt me. He died an embittered, lonely man. Tom turned to me. I'm not saying you should forgive your son or let him back into your life. Just think about it. What's best for you? His words caught me off guard with their simplicity and wisdom. What's best for me? Not for Christopher or Neil or anyone else. For me? When I got home, I called Neil. I'm willing to testify, I said, but on the condition that I want to talk to Christopher first, in person. That can be arranged, Neil replied with a distinct relief in his voice. I'll arrange a meeting at the detention center. 3 days later, I was back in the same visiting room where I'd met my son 6 months earlier. Christopher looked different, even thinner, but he was straighter, his eyes clearer. Thanks for coming, Dad, he said, sitting down across from me. I didn't come as a father, I said, trying to speak calmly. I came as a victim being asked to testify in favor of the accused. His face contorted in pain for a moment, but he quickly pulled himself together and nodded. I understand. I'm grateful anyway. I need to hear the truth from you, Christopher. I looked him straight in the eye. The whole truth. What did you know about Raven's plans when you realized she was planning a scam? Christopher took a deep breath. I didn't know about the document forgery until the very end. That was true, but I suspected something was wrong when she insisted on selling it right away, without waiting for you to recover. He lowered his gaze. I should have called you. I should have checked. But I was afraid to find out the truth, afraid I'd have to choose between my wife and my father. And you chose her, I said. Yes, he nodded. I did, and it was the biggest mistake of my life. We talked for over an hour. Christopher told me everything. How Raven had gradually manipulated him, how she'd isolated him from me, how she'd made him believe that she was acting in my best interests, and how he'd turned a blind eye to the obvious oddities and inconsistencies, wanting to believe the best. I was weak, he admitted at the end, weak and stupid, and I paid a high price for it. I looked at my son, a grown man, broken by life and his own mistakes, and felt something change inside me. Not forgiveness, no. Not forgiveness yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. I'll testify in your favor, I said, rising. But don't be under any illusions, Christopher. It doesn't mean things are going to go back to the way they were between us. I know, Dad. He looked at me with a sad smile. But it's more than I dared hope for. A week later, I gave my formal testimony, confirming that I thought Christopher's case could be reconsidered in light of the new circumstances. Neil said it would make a big difference in the court's decision, and the sentence would likely be reduced. You did the right thing, Walt, he said, shaking my hand after the hearing. I hope so, I replied, feeling a strange emptiness inside. Back at the lake, I plunged headlong into work on the house and garden, as if trying to dull the emotional turmoil with physical labor. I planted a new flower bed, built a tool shed, and renovated the boat dock. Barbara, noticing my condition, began to invite me to dinners and get-togethers more often, but she didn't ask why. She had a wonderful tact, a quality Dorothy had always appreciated in people. At the end of July, the official notice from the court came. Christopher's sentence had been reduced to 3 years, with parole eligibility after 1 year. Given the time already served, that meant he could be out in a few months. I didn't know how to feel about it. On the one hand, I was glad he had a chance to start his life over. On the other hand, I wasn't sure I was ready for his return, for a possible attempt to rebuild the relationship. In August, a new letter arrived from Christopher. He wrote that his sentence had been reduced, thanking him for his help, talking about his plans for the future, to get a job as an accountant, rent a modest place to live, start fresh. I won't impose on you, Dad, he wrote. I realize that I may have lost the right to be called your son, but I want you to know that I will always be grateful for what you've done for me. And not just now, with the testimony in court, but for the rest of my life. For raising me, for teaching me how to work with my hands, for showing me what honesty and dignity are, even if I didn't learn those lessons as well as I should have. I folded the letter and put it away in the same folder where I kept the others. Didn't respond. Wasn't ready. Summer was slowly turning to fall. The leaves on the trees around the lake were beginning to change color from green to yellow and red. Tourists were becoming fewer and fewer, and the lake was slowly being reclaimed by the locals and fishermen. One evening, as I sat on the veranda watching the sunset, a text came in from Neil. Christopher is getting out in 2 weeks. Parole has been approved. He asked for your address. I told him I had to get your permission first. What should I say to him? I stared at those words for a long time, feeling the anxiety building inside. Was I prepared for Christopher to know where I lived? That he might one day show up on the doorstep of my new home, my new life? Without answering Neil, I went into the house and pulled out an old photo album, the one I'd brought back from Walnut Creek but rarely opened. I flipped through the pages, looking at the pictures. Little Christopher in Dorothy's arms, me teaching him to ride his bike, family picnics, birthdays, Christmas by the tree. So many happy moments, so much love. How did we come from that to betrayal, to cheating, to prison? I closed the album and went back to the veranda. The sun was already almost hidden behind the horizon, coloring the sky and water in shades of orange and purple. A beautiful, peaceful evening, one of many in my new life. I typed a reply to Niall. Don't give him the address. Not right now. Maybe later. But if he wants to write, have him send letters through you. 3 days later, Neil called. Christopher's getting out on Monday, he said. He understands about the address. He says he respects your decision and won't push. But he wrote you a letter and asked me to tell you. You can send it to the post office, I replied. Walt, I'm in the neighborhood, at a conference in Napa. I can stop by and bring it to you in person. I've been wanting to see your new house for a long time. I agreed, although the idea of receiving a letter from my son from the hands of a friend rather than the mailman seemed strange, almost intimate. Neil arrived the next day, wearing an expensive suit but no tie, with a bottle of good whiskey and an envelope. You look great, Walt, he said, hugging me. Living on the lake has been good for you, he said, hugging me. We sat on the porch, sipping whiskey and looking out at the water. We talked about all kinds of things, about fishing, about the news from Walnut Creek, about Neil's grown children who had already started their careers, about anything but the envelope lying on the table between us. Finally, as the sun began to set, Neil nodded at the letter. You don't have to read it now, or ever. You're right. I took the envelope, twirled it in my hands. Thin, only one sheet inside, judging by the weight. What does he intend to do when he gets out? Got a room in Sacramento, got a job as an assistant accountant for a small firm through an ex-convict rehabilitation program. Modest job, modest life, but honest. Neil sipped his whiskey. He's changed a lot, Walt. What happened really affected him. Or he's become a better actor, I remarked. Maybe, Neil didn't argue. Time will tell. When Neil left, I sat on the veranda with the unopened letter in my hands. The sun was almost over the horizon, and dusk was spreading across the lake. The lights were on in the house across the street. Jason was probably sitting at his book. I stared at the envelope, at Christopher's neat handwriting, and thought about Tom's words, about his father, who died without forgiving his son, about how unforgiveness had hurt him more than his child. Was I ready to forgive? I don't know. Maybe I never will be. But was I ready to move on, to put the past behind me, to focus on my new life? Yes, definitely yes. I pulled a lighter out of my pocket, an old reliable Zippo, a 30th birthday present from Dorothy. I flicked the lid on, shot out a spark. The flame flickered, steady, bright in the fading twilight. I held the envelope to the fire. The paper burned quickly, the edges blackened and curled. I held the letter until it turned to ash, which the breeze from the lake picked up and carried away. Not out of cruelty, not out of a desire to hurt, but because it was the only way to truly let go of the past. After reading the letter, I would inevitably begin to analyze, compare, doubt. It would become one more thread tying me to the story I wanted to leave behind. As the last flakes of ash disappeared into the darkness, I felt a strange relief. It was as if the heaviness I'd been carrying for so long had finally dissolved. I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the last reflections of the sunset. My new home, my new life, without toxic relationships, without betrayal, without the constant need to look back. Maybe someday I'd be ready to face Christopher, to listen to him, to talk to him like two adults, maybe even start building some new relationships, not as father and son, but as two people bound by a shared past. But not now. What I needed right now was peace, silence, freedom. From the house came the sound of an old record. Frank Sinatra, Dorothy's favorite singer. I'd put it on purpose, before Neil came, as a kind of talisman. "I did it my way," Sinatra sang in his velvet voice, and I smiled. "Yes, that's right. In my own way. Not perfectly, not without mistakes, but honestly, following my own beliefs, my own conscience." The last rays of the sun disappeared over the horizon, and the lake sank into darkness, broken only by the reflections of the stars and the occasional lights from the opposite shore. I sat in silence, soaking up the peace of this moment. Tomorrow would be a new day. I would go fishing with Tom, maybe stop in town for groceries, continue working on the garden bench I was making for Barbara. Ordinary, simple things. Ordinary, simple life. And in that simplicity, I finally found what I'd been looking for all along. Not just a lake house, but inner peace. Freedom from the past, from the resentments, from the toxic relationships that had poisoned my life for so long. I rose from my chair, took one last look at the dark surface of the lake, and walked into the house, leaving the door open to let in the cool night breeze. Tomorrow would be a new day, and I would meet it without the baggage of the past, ready for whatever the future brought.